Good morning, Louisville. I'm Theo Edmonds, co-founder of a creative chamber of commerce based in Louisville, Kentucky. And welcome to week 4 of the Who's Louisville broadcast. With me this morning, I have Stacy Bailey-Ndiaye of Bridge Kids International. Good morning, Stacy.
Good morning.
The show is called Who's Louisville? And so let's just start there. Who is Louisville right now?
I think Louisville is on the upswing. I feel like there are some interesting creative things going on. There's a lot of energy that's starting to build. I think people are starting to have different conversations. And so I'm hoping we get to a point where kind of all Louisvillians are Louisville, you know. I think that folks are like bit by bit, getting there.
That's great. Give us just a thumbnail on Bridge Kids International. It's based here in Louisville, but it's a worldwide organization.
It's a global organization. Bridge Kids International, just in a nutshell, we help young people to develop their own solutions to community problems. And our focus is on young people of Africa and the African diaspora. We're in 6 countries now. And so we link young folks up while they're working in their home community. So it's not the kind of thing where we are helping those kids, over there we're going to raise money and kids do that for other kids. It's not that. They're working on solutions in their home communities. And we have several focus areas: economic development, education, environment, girls' rights, and health. And we've recently added cultural production and just relationship building, which is more about like global citizenship and creating understanding. And they develop their own projects, and we support them as they do that. With materials, we'll help them when they're ready, help them launch their project, and but it's got to be sustainable. It's got to be, and it's got to be theirs. And so we focus on what you can do. We don't have millions of dollars to give, and so it's not about waiting for that. It's about how do you use your creativity to come up with like a simple, elegant solution that is something that you can do, and then you can get help and then grow it bigger and bigger.
We were talking with Anthony Smith, who's the director of Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods for the city of Louisville last week, and he was talking about his old days at NC3 and how one of their tenets was to, they view people as creative and whole as they meet them. And that sounds a little bit like some of your philosophy as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and for us, it really started because I think when you think globally, but also locally in communities like ours, quite often it's communities of color, or particularly like when you think about poverty, you think about, because that's the image that that's out there, or these are the people who need to be the beneficiaries of somebody else's like good graces, whether it's here. Again, the same thing happens here, in communities in the United States. And this is about self-determining and people tapping into their own creativity. They know their own issues better than anybody else.
Right.
But a lot of times they're not challenged to say, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? You come up, because if you sit around and wait for someone else to save you, I mean, they're just not coming. And so for the most part, generally. And so it's like,
and that's a liberating thought, actually.
No, it really is, because, and it's just funny. I was just watching some show, a movie on PBS, a documentary the other day. There's a woman in the Kibera slums in Kenya, and she was saying the same thing. I wish all these like NGOs would go away, because they've been here for years and things haven't changed until we're the ones who have to change it, and then we'll have change. And that's the same notion that Bridge Kids is designed around.
That's great. And that gets to a lot of the work that you and I are doing together. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Talk about Stacy for a while.
Okay.
What is something that you've read or seen at the national or international level, since that's where you work, that you think Louisville could learn from?
Well, you know what? The first thing that came, there's this book, but it's the same concept that we're talking about. It's called When Rain Clouds Gather, by Bessie Head, and it's set in it's Southern Africa. Wow, I'm blanking on the name of the country. Botswana.
Okay.
It's set in Botswana, and it's about, again, this community that's coming together around farming. It's about relationships and all that kind of
Sure.
stuff, but about what happens, in that community and kind of what it takes, and about
Yeah.
people deciding, that they are going to chart a course, different course for
So
their
in
lives.
that book, what you talk about people deciding, is there something that is the crux of the book? What was the moment of decision? What was the moment where thinking about it became deciding?
Oh gosh, I wish I could remember all of the. It's been a while since I've read it, but I've had my students read it too. That's how much, and I'm like, oh God, I wish I just said it now because I don't remember all of the plot. But you know what, I do remember, like the problem solving that has to go on. Things just don't always go according to plan.
Right.
And I think that's it. Sometimes people get really discouraged by that. But it's about the daily, everyday kind of push toward change.
Sure.
And I think that's important for any community that's trying to change. But I think in Louisville, I think that's really important now, because sometimes we tend to be a little reactive.
Sure.
Something happens and then we all
Right.
everyone wants to kind of jump on the bandwagon and change things. But it's that steady, kind of everyday intentional push.
Yes.
I think that makes a difference in the long run.
Another thing on that note that I've noticed too, is that in the U.S. particularly, because of the way our educational system is structured and other things, we've made failure a dirty word. Right? It's like
true.
People will go to great lengths to hide failure from others.
Yeah.
And in the startup entrepreneur world, failure is viewed as a necessary thing.
Right.
You're never going to get there without it. What are you seeing are some of the differences maybe in how some of network that you work with in, say, Africa, how do they view failure differently maybe than we do in the U.S.? Or do they?
I mean, I just see, okay, here's the thing. I think what I've learned, someone made this comment that made so much sense to me. They said, your mindset, when you live in a world where you flip on the light switch and you're not sure if the lights are going to come on, is very different from your mindset if you live in a place where you flip on the light switch and the lights always come on, And so things are a little less predictable. And there are things that are in the developing world, and there are things that are clearly out of your control, And so what it is, and so failure or things not going according to plan, let's put it that way, is part of, everyday life. And so it's about it's the creativity that comes into it to figure out, okay, well, what can we shift? Like, how do we pivot? What can we do? I mean, because it's just, the resources aren't always there. Things happen, things happen,
Yes.
And so, and you keep trying and you keep pushing. And I think, you got to be comfortable with that. But I think here, like I said, in this country, and I think other probably, more developed countries too, I think you have, because you have all this access, and there's the story, the ethos of America, that you can come up from nothing, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and like be a success, and we value success, as if it's a part of character, just because somebody's rich, they must be a good person or something like that. So when you're in that environment, I can understand why failure, is part of that, and you can also be. Here, people are defined by what you do quite often, and sometimes in other parts of the world, people are a little bit more defined by who they are.
And how do you get to that? Let's explore that, because that's an interesting concept, and I totally agree with you. When you say people are defined by who they are, how is that determined?
What do you mean in terms of what criteria? Like,
I mean, like, so say, here, I do agree that people define us by who we are. We're very quick to label people
Sure.
in this country based upon job categories,
Sure.
you know, and language is so inadequate to, you know, in that mode, because, you know, when you say I'm an artist, for instance, what does that even mean?
Right.
And so in your analogy, you were talking about people defined by who they are. So what are some of the aspects of the human character that would go into that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, so it wasn't just interesting for me. I've spent a lot of time in Senegal. That's my second home, and people don't just ask, "What do you do for a living?" The way we ask that here, "What do you do?" You know, that's just a normal. In your first conversation with someone, you ask, "What do you do?" And people just don't do that there. When we talk about character, I think when you are in places that are more communal, in terms of, you're also defined by the other people, you know, in your life too, you know, and the role that you play in their lives, you know. So someone who can bring people together, you know, is someone who takes care of other people, someone who gives good advice. Someone who, you know, the one that you call on in the conflict, you know, someone who leads in that way. But quite often, like, you know, hospitality is very important. Someone who is welcoming, who I keep this term in my head is like who gathers people, and sort of run smoothly. And then there's the people who, you know, the movers and the shakers, you know, who get things going. You know, people are defined by that too. And then there's, you know, there's also a notion of, you know, the big guy, you know, with the big leader guy, like, you know, that's also part of it. But then you have women, you know, who are so often the backbone of families, you know, and are and those same characteristics, I think, when people look at, you know, at women, you know, who are good at taking care of. But the same way, again, in that sense, gendered, I don't think comes into it, because men who also take care of people, I think, and support people is really important.
Are the gender roles that we have been working under for the last 100 years in the United States, are they adequate for where we are as a society right now, do you think?
I still don't think we get gender, you know, right, because, you know, there's a lot of talk, and people talk about this a lot, but, you know, for people to have choices, it's just really, really difficult, because I think for women, you know, we're still defined by the traditional roles, no matter what, no matter who you are. You know, get into a relationship, I mean, you gotta, like, you know, you still gotta deal with all of that stuff, you know. I mean, it's just and, you know, and hopefully, you know, you're with a guy who is generally trying to work it out, because it doesn't mean that, you know, they get it. The stuff still comes up. And I think if you are you know, a leader as a woman, a successful, you know, woman, or one of those movers and shakers, it's still not easy, because at the end of the day, we know women still aren't paid the same amount as men, and so it's the way society is looking at you. It's what's going on in your personal life, and it's how, you know, we look at ourselves too. You know, because if you can't get it all done and get it all right, you know, you feel like you're failing in some way. You know, and so I think, you know, women, we're still suffering by having to be everything, you know, at the same time. And I think it's just unsustainable. I mean, it's just you can't do all of that, I think. I mean, people do it. You know, people do it, but it's just at what cost is, you know, is really the thing.
What are some of the most beneficial things that you think are being discussed at the national level in the U.S. right now that we could be discussing better here in Louisville?
Said that they're discussing well. That's another thing. I mean, I still don't think. I think one of the deep conversations Louisville still needs to have is around race. You know, race and class. Though I'm not sure that the rest of the country is having a
Had
great
reference time,
conversation
yeah.
about it either. But I think Louisville is a bit behind on even that. And because until we get that right,
Mm-hmm.
this city will never be what it could be, because you have all this talent,
Yes.
and you have, and when you have parts of the city that are not resourced and other parts that are, and you have people who are, who don't have a lot of hope because they have a lot of the same, resources, they're not exposed to things at the same level as other people, and I'm thinking, especially about young people. The city's missing out, and I think it's an embarrassment, you know what I mean, for you to talk about, you talk about all this, great development that's going on in some part of the city,
Mm-hmm.
and if someone who was, say, visiting were to drive,
Yes.
just a few miles, where you see the difference. I mean, it just shows, to me, a lack of real creativity, because I think there's some
so
real
too,
interesting, because I do think, and we talk about other conversations when you're talking about neighborhoods,
Mm-hmm.
and I think some cities are trying to do some different things around what that means,
Give me an
and building
example of
community. Well, we had an event when I was working at the Muhammad Ali Institute. The Cleveland Foundation
Mm-hmm.
was there, and as one of the presenters, and they were talking about what they were trying to do in terms of developing, in a sort of a smarter way. And it wasn't, it was them. I'll give you an example. Okay, she brought this up, and this is someone from the Cleveland Foundation,
Okay.
so they, and I can't remember her name for the moment, but she was saying that. They're working on their downtown,
Mm-hmm.
and again, trying to engage. So they're doing some more interesting things around economy and building a local economy where the workers are part owners, of the
Sure.
businesses, there, of some of those businesses, looking. And some of the development is like what other downtowns do,
Right.
but they were trying to include the neighborhoods, that were surrounding, because quite often you get downtowns that are really well developed, but then right outside, just like I was saying, the neighborhoods that are around aren't. But it was interesting because she talked about these young African American men had left and gone off to school and decided to come back. And they decided, the three of them themselves, that they were going to buy a house, in their old neighborhood on the same block. And they were going to rehab the house, and this is, one of those, neighborhoods that had been blighted or whatever. And that it was that kind of decision, that they did. And then, of course, that develops that block. You get 3 nice houses on the block.
Mm-hmm.
That starts to change that block, And the fact that she was talking about that as this is another way of looking at, development, is our neighborhood development, I thought was something that was really, really interesting, that she would raise that as a story.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people maybe aren't even in tune, to that kind of thing. So again, people, because unless the development works for some of the people at least that used to live there, it's over the long haul, it's not gonna really be helpful.
There seems to be a lot of focus on the built environment, and indeed, that's of paramount importance. What we're seeing in our work is that the people and the programming don't often match the ambitions of the built environment strategies.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the things that you've seen in your work where there's that balance between the built environment and then the programming that's robust to match it?
I'll talk to you about what we're working on.
That's great.
Yeah, like what we're trying to. So we're working on. There's a building. We're calling it Our Place. That is, it's on 6th and Kentucky in a park, and it's been. It's not abandoned because the city owns it, but it's been vacant. Let's put it that way, for more than 10 years. And what we want to do in that space is to actually. It has several focuses to it. One is youth social entrepreneurship, because we're going to have a think lab in there, which is where young people can come a physical space to design their own community-based projects, their own businesses, whatever. So we'll have the technology, it's a creative space, with all the whiteboards, kind of like you all have around, that kind of thing, and the support, to do that. And when I say community-based projects, so you get a young person who actually, they see something that they want to do, but don't know how to go about it.
Sure.
So they just have a spark. And then it's our job to help them to develop that into a real project. But there's an intergenerational component to it, because there is a senior home that's right at the other end of the park.
Yeah.
So we've already gone and we've talked to seniors about how they would like to engage, with young people.
Yes.
And so we're building it around that, and we're creating there's a global citizenship component, and so we're going to have a cafe in there. That's not. Then I'll tell you the title, global citizenship, in a second, because it's a sustainable environment. So there has to be some kind of income generating component to it. And so we're having this kind of global cafe, but it's also, there's a young lady who runs Louisville Vegan Kitchen, and so she, even though it won't be all vegan, she's part of the one that's helping us to design like the menu and what we would do. But the idea is to engage with either immigrant or refugees or the international community here in the city who are caterers.
And it's a growing community.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, who are caterers, because there's a lot of people who don't necessarily have their own restaurant or something like that, but when there are these huge community functions, somebody's cooking that food, and so have this rotating menu, that would engage those caterers, and so you have this wonderful international menu that's part of that, and it would be a breakfast and lunch cafe, and at the end of the day, at the end of lunch, a community space. Someone once told me, I really want to have a book club, but I don't know where to do it. Where would I do it? Well, this would be a perfect space for that. It'll have a commercial kitchen, and so there'll be food programming, going on around that. There's other components too, like including like doing a green, rehab and using it as an educational space, for that. That kind of thinking about engaging the community, pulling people in so that then they're able to go back out and change and be a part of whatever is going on. So, we're there, then we're going to have some events in the park.
Yeah.
If the neighborhood associations, the 2 neighborhood associations, they are all part of this. They actually, someone who lives in the neighborhood told me about the building and invited Bridge kids and said, this would be perfect for you. So there are colleges, Simmons and Spalding, that are right there. Well, how would we engage with the colleges? We talked with AMPed about, there's a little space in there, like, can we have a satellite, for AMP, so we can get the,
AMPed is the music.
Yes, like the music, production, coming. So we started that conversation. Like, how do you have this, it's not really a big space, but something that feels a whole lot bigger because people are in it and are making it come to life. And I think that's what you need. I mean, here we are on Market Street, we're in Nulu, and this is a place where people walk. People walk around, like, you see activity. There are few places in the city that are like that. There need to be more.
I agree.
There really do need to be more. But the thing that what we're hoping is that it be a diverse environment, because we are intentional about it being a diverse environment.
And you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that, because global citizenship is part of who we are, like, the question is, how do you make that real? Right. It has to be. But the thing is, the question is, like, how do you make that real? What does that practically look like? Because it's one thing to be something in your head, and, to think about something, like, but it's kind of not enough. It's like, how do you then live it out? And that's so if we believe in youth social entrepreneurship, how do we live that out? If we believe in sustainability, how do we live that out? So that people can look, they see, without even ever having to ask the question, okay, I kind of know what those folks are about.
Well, what you're describing is this holistic thinking, and that can take place at the micro level in a very specific neighborhood. it takes place more at a systems even
Sure.
level, which is kind of where ideas and our work looks at it, is how are we linking these different micro activities around the city together so they're part of a network that makes sense, that is looking at this holistic form of development.
Sure.
Then you go on up to the regional level and the national level. And so often I think that just as some of your examples you gave of your work in West Africa, it has to start at the most local level, because that's where we're going to see the manifestation of it, and that's where we're going to feel it first. And so many times, you're exactly right, is that people have to be able to look at it, touch it, feel it, taste it, before it really sinks in. But once they do that, a world of possibilities open up in their own mind.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And even, you know, the example that I gave of the young men buying houses on the street, mm-hmm. the reason that stood out in my mind so much, because again, it's very intentional. Yeah. They were putting themselves where their commitment is. Yeah. Like, you know, like I think you have to show up, like you have to be there, you know, and I think a lot of times what happens is like we kind of try to develop things from afar. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. That you know, that it's like it's all theoretical. Yeah. Yeah, you know, and it can't just all be theoretical.
What is the relationship between art and the work that you do?
Well, I see it a lot more now that we're involved with you. I think the creative, I think, is a part of what we've always done. When you talk about creative solutions, like the thinking that goes into seeing opportunity where it didn't look like before. Like, you have to be able to visualize. If you see something broken down, yeah, and you can visualize this whole place that's come back to life, I can only imagine, as someone who doesn't like label myself an artist, mm-hmm. that has to be part of the artist spirit too, you know, in there somewhere. But more literally, the culture, I think the arts is one of the best ways to share culture. And that's been at the core of what Bridge Kids has been about. And what's been great about us now, like officially adding that component, because we've always wanted to share cultures. If you got all these people coming together, mm-hmm. how do you do? What would happen is, when we had our Bridge Kids camp in Senegal, so we had representatives from all the different countries, like, how would we share? Like, we would sing, you know, yeah. People are teaching each other songs, we're learning each other's dances, you know, that kind of, that's what naturally, you know, kind of what happened. And so here in Louisville, it's interesting because Bridge Kids is one of the main coordinator of the African Heritage Festival, which has a huge art running mm-hmm. on, you know, through it in terms of performance and sharing culture. But that's a strategy, actually, for engaging community, right. Trying to get particularly the African American community and the growing African Caribbean community here in Louisville more connected to each other. Right. Someone I was talking about the other day, I was like, I kind of forget to tell the story. Some of that came from stories of bullying. Actually, yeah, because...
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, just in working with some young folks who we were asked to... It's interesting, just the connections that happen. We have a Bridge Kids group in Rwanda, and there's a community here. They have some family, actually, that are here in Louisville. That's how we met the folks in Rwanda. Anyway, long story. But she said, well, I know what you're doing, you know, back, you know, home in Rwanda. Our teenagers, we're having some issues in our church. Could you maybe come and like work with our teenagers? And so we're like, okay, let's see what we can do. I don't know. And so, but we ended up having these like discussions with the young folks, and they said like the folks who bullied them the most in school, like who teased them, all of that, were African Americans. And that broke my heart, you know, and I know that because I know that even from my other work that I would do in New York and stuff. But in a lot of that, there are a lot of reasons for that. First of all, people are in close proximity, and so they're the ones. But so there are a lot of reasons for that, internalized racism, all that kind of stuff too. But that should not be the case. And so for me as an African American, you know, that's, first of all, my heart breaks, you know, for the kids who are going through it. And then as an African American, that's just unacceptable. You know, if anybody should be welcoming them, you know, first, it should be, you know, us.
Right.
But our relationships, you know, because of our history, are not been developed. And so the idea for the African Heritage Festival actually came out of that. Well, how can we create some ways for people to work together in the city, to get to know each other, to celebrate each other? And now we're on our third year of the African Heritage Festival.
And the next one is already being planned for
September 12th. But now it's going to be September 11th and 12th. We're adding another day. We're starting on the Friday. Now we just decided that last week. And so it's growing. There's a sports, we have a whole sports tournament.
Oh, that's
great.
What,
yes, there's a whole soccer piece. So, you know, if you want to get folks from the international community.
You better have soccer.
Yeah, right, exactly. And get the men involved, too. Like, you know, but it's a day, now a day plus. Tons of, like, great, amazing, like, performance that goes on that day. That's why I actually know Lance that we work with and Roots and Wings.
Lance Newman, who's the poet.
Exactly. So he does that, and some of the other young people in Zuri, they perform there. I mean, and great food and vendors and stuff for kids. I mean, it's just good, fun festival stuff. Yeah. You know, but it has the focus is on Africa, the African diaspora, you know, here in the city. And so,
what is the most important, or one of the most important things for people who are interested in supporting community development work in West Louisville, but who might not be African American or be from some of the traditions of some of the communities that are there? How would you recommend that someone go about, maybe who's in, I don't know, say, you know, out in East Louisville or somewhere, who doesn't come from a life experience that is where they have been part of a larger African American community? What's some of the ways that they can begin to plug in to some of this work and supporting it?
I think you have to come humble. You know, I think you have to come clear in yourself that you don't know everything that's going on, that you don't have the answer to fix it, you know, and because that's the worst, you know, because people come and go. People always, there are all kinds of programs, you know, that come and go. And that's because that's disrespectful.
Yes,
and I think, and come willing to learn and be with people and expect to find. I think our expectations are really, really, really important. Expect to find not just struggle, you know, but expect to find triumph. Right. And exactly. And expect to find people who care about their communities that are there, that you don't see on the news, you know, every day. And then, you know, be ready to roll up your sleeves and work alongside people. I mean, if you feel like you need to be the one in the lead, then you probably should, like, stay home, you know, honestly. Yeah. But I think if you're ready to roll up your sleeves, I mean, I'll give you a great example of that. There's a community garden in Parkland, which, you know, I love those folks like who do that garden. And that's where one of the areas where Bridge Kids, we really want to work and be a part of the Parkland community. But when you look in the garden in terms of the development of the garden, you see, like, all kinds of folks. Of course, it's the people who live there who have the plots and all that. Right. But people from the county extension and, like, you know, all those other folks, they're not from that community. But people have come in and just say, roll up your sleeves. Like, this is what I have to give. Like, here's my expertise. If you're willing to do this, I can help with that. Yes. You know, where can I fit in? Like, how can I? And so I think that partnership kind of mentality is something that's really really important, and people being willing to learn and willing to hear people's stories and curious. You know, really, I think bringing your curiosity to something is really, really, really important. It is. Yeah,
I know in our partnership, I have certainly learned a lot. I mean, in the last 2 years that we've been doing the work at Ideas, I'm asking radically different questions, you know, than I was at the beginning, and you know. it's through some missteps and through some triumphs and through some deep listening that I think that our work has become more engaged and more important to us as it's become more important to others, because we've opened up space for others to find their space in what we're doing, and we wanted to be in the spaces of others. Sure. So can you talk a little bit about the Roots and Wings projects just from your perspective? Because I think one of the things that I would like you to talk about too is a lot of times as we talk to people around the city, they don't fully get what we do here at Ideas.
Oh, yeah. It took me. I'm still getting it. You know what I mean? I'm still learning. I think I've got it. I can talk about it a little bit, but I'm still learning.
So could you just, as one of our partners, talk about how you found this process to be, and what the process is, and what has been beneficial to you and your organization that we've been able to provide or to partner with you guys on?
I think back to our very first conversation that we just clicked, because I think we were both talking a similar language about social entrepreneurship and community development, but also through social enterprise, which is really important to me and to Bridge Kids and what we do. And I think we have a similar vision about community development.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you what I have appreciated so much about our relationship and our partnership is sort of an opening up I'm like running in slightly different circles now in some ways, with people that I wouldn't have, been, having conversations with, in the past. But a freedom of thinking around maybe doing something a little bit differently, around finding a home for a creative mind, that we want to experiment and not being afraid to fail, but let's just try something different. Why don't we think, well, what if? There's just a lot of kind of what if conversations going on, or if we could, and about these kind of weird eclectic partnersps.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, with Roots and Wings. If we're talking about bringing together, right? Roots and Wings is Roots and Wings is our project with one of the projects that Ideas supported and actually helped pull together was the Smoketown Poetry Opera, and it's just these amazing young artists, from DJs to spoken word artists to dancers and singers, and telling the story of this community of Smoketown, and bringing Smoketown, the story of Smoketown, to a different audience, but also celebrating for people there in that community, this community that there was a housing project that was torn down, and what happens to the people, and who were those people, and who years later folks won't remember, who they were, because it'll look different. It'll just be totally different. So those artists, when you came to me and asked me, okay, well, there's these grant opportunities. What if we did this in other communities? And what would that look like? And so we started working on particularly this Art Place grant. And as we thought about it, the idea of bringing together the ballet and dancers who crump and stuff, and the orchestra, with hip hop music, we're talking about connecting Appalachian culture to West African culture.
Because there is a connection.
There is a connection, and one of those deep connections of the banjo is actually to the part of West Africa that I know best. Senegal, Gambia, kind of that area, and telling a different story, even rewriting, or not even rewriting, but actually sharing a narrative that's different. So when you talk about the neighborhoods, the zones of hope neighborhoods, Shawnee, California, Newburgh, Russell, and I'm leaving somebody out. Oh no, and I'm blanking right now.
Did you say Parkland?
No, it is a Parkland.
Okay.
Okay, so Parkland. And when you talk about, these are Kentucky neighborhoods in Louisville, Kentucky,
Yeah.
and all part of that all goes into, who makes up those folks and telling a different story other than when people think of Kentucky, they pretty much think of like hillbillies, and so, but there are many, many other stories that have made, this place what it is, and you can't fully talk about Kentucky, without, when you're leaving groups out. And so this is a way to kind of have those neighborhoods retell their stories as these young artists go into those neighborhoods and work, and they're gathering the stories
Right.
of people. But when you're gathering stories, they're going to be working then with that community to give those stories back to the community. And I like to think about it as like reintroducing those neighborhoods to themselves and to the people that are there. So you're talking about what's going on in the past as well as contemporary stories. And so if you imagine these young people doing that over the course, so you're putting two artists, so it could be a dancer and a poet,
Right.
And they're working in community centers that could use some
And
help.
animating those spaces in the community centers.
Exactly. Because, when I think of art, honestly, in community centers, generally I think of like kids coloring or painting their pictures. So this is like this is bringing something different and a
Right.
different way of thinking. And hopefully as they work in that 6-month period, then the institutions themselves begin to think differently about what they can do.
And hopefully at the end of it, beyond kind of expanding the narrative of the story of Kentucky to include the contemporary stories of not only of African Americans in West Louisville as much as the people in Appalachia and the influences that have come from other lands and other places into making Kentucky what it is, I think is something that is a worthwhile endeavor, because the more we can see ourselves in our own home, the more powerful we become in our own voices.
Absolutely. And then because I think when we think about this process, I think, and when we explain what it is we're trying to do, it's also a mindset that these young folks are going to be coming into the community, with.
And most of them are from
Yes,
the communities
exactly,
in
are
which
from
they'll
these
be working.
communities.
Yeah.
But because of, I think, what Ideas does, you're talking about bridging business and the arts, I think I'm starting to see it already, even in them, and thinking like the notion that they should be paid, for the work that they do.
Yes, absolutely.
Is something I think that can be kind of revolutionary, for an artist or even, a young person who does something because they love it, but to know that you can make a living out of it.
As long as they're willing to put the work
Sure,
in.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But to have that, to also create this supportive environment where that's valued.
Yes.
And I think when you're connecting their art to the ballet and to the orchestra and like those kinds of things that are valued here in the city, it raises everybody up. Because quite frankly, the ballet and the orchestra, I'm sure, could use some fresh, fresh look at what they're doing too.
Yeah.
And so I think it's good for everybody. But then when you bring the business side into it, then you begin to talk about community development, because you're talking about the individuals who are getting skills,
and,
for the
and to
community.
be clear on that for those who are listening, when we talk about the business side of it, what we're talking about is for every person that's on stage, say in a production, there's someone who's selling the tickets. There's customer service that's involved. There's front of house, back of house. There's technical skills and running soundboards and light boards. All of that are transferable job skills that the arts can be a fabulous context for teaching those things. And then where those skills can be transferred to, it's pretty much across the board. You can take those skills and do a lot with those.
And what would be amazing if at the end of this, you're talking 5 neighborhoods, right?
All right.
But what would it look like to have more of an arts infrastructure in those neighborhoods that does hire people, that does create income and resource and wealth, in those neighborhoods? It's good in the whole city. It's good anywhere else. They can take it anywhere.
Yes.
But what would it look like to use that as some of the fodder to develop in those neighborhoods? neighborhoods. So and if you're talking about developing neighborhoods, then you're learning about zoning. Then you're learning about what's going on with the rest of the plan for the city. You start asking different questions, and I think helping young people and helping them to begin to look at their place in the city
Yes.
as something different, that they should be asking those questions. They have a right to,
Yes.
and they have a right to get the answers too.
That's right.
And then they have a right to be part of the conversation, and they have a right then to help be part of the decision making.
Absolutely.
And for those, and so
we're all better off because
exactly. And so we're talking about what we talk about. We start out talking as like an art based project becomes
something
a whole lot more, I think, over time.
I think that's because we intend it to be that way.
Yeah, exactly.
The way I think about it is, if a city is a body, and you're not using a third of your body, you're not working at your full capacity.
You really aren't. You really aren't. And you need. Louisville needs it. I mean, it really needs it, and it will take the city to a whole nother place in terms of the I don't know what the different classes of cities are, whatever. But there's already talk about Louisville being this great place to live. Well, it needs to be a great place to live for everyone.
That's right.
And then it becomes an even better or greater place to live.
And on that note, I'm going to close out. Stacy, thank you for being here. If someone wants to get in touch with Bridge Kids International, the website is
www.bridge-kids.org.
Bridge-kids.org. All right, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back again next week at 8 a.m. on Wednesday. If you've heard the banging behind me today as we've been talking here, that is courtesy of the New Bridge Project. Louisville has a lot of really wonderful infrastructure projects going on today, and that is the banging of what will be a new bridge connecting us to the regional aspect of our city over in Indiana. So thank you again for being here today, and we'll see you next time.